mean I'll see it.
I don't usually post things like this, but I haven't been able to sleep for more than 2 hours at a time since this happened. You know that feeling when you're walking up a flight of stairs in the dark and you're absolutely convinced something is reaching out for your ankle? Imagine that feeling, but it doesn't go away when you turn on the lights. It just sits in the back of your brain, rotting. My house is one of those older brick builds on the edge of a wooded suburban patch. It's quiet, which is why I liked it. Usually, the only thing that sets off my porch camera is a stray cat or a particularly fat raccoon. But a few nights ago, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was that specific, sharp vibration that tells you someone is at the door. I glanced at the time. It was exactly 2:14 in the morning. I stayed under the covers for a second, my heart already doing that weird, uneven thudding in my chest. I figured it was a delivery driver at the wrong house or maybe a drunk neighbor. I pulled up the live feed, expecting to see a blurred face or an empty porch. Instead, I saw a man. He was wearing a dark, oversized hoodie, the kind that makes the person inside look shapeless and jagged. He wasn't moving. He was standing directly in front of the lens, maybe 6 inches away. He didn't have a mask on, but his face was tilted down just enough so the shadow of the hood swallowed his features, leaving only the pale, sharp line of a grin visible in the infrared glow. He wasn't reaching for the doorbell. He wasn't knocking. He was just looking. It felt like he was staring through the camera, through the phone screen, and straight into my eyes. My thumb hovered over the microphone button. I was going to shout something, tell him I was armed or that the police were on their way, but then I saw it. The camera is mounted about 7 feet up, angled downward. At the very bottom of the frame, near the edge of the brick siding, there was a movement. It was subtle, a shifting of fabric against stone. I squinted at the small screen, zooming in. There was a second man. He was dressed in grease-stained work clothes, and he was flattened against the wall, tucked into the blind spot directly beneath the camera. He was crouched so low he looked like a broken umbrella. In his right hand, he gripped a heavy, rusted crowbar. The iron was flaked with orange decay, and he held it with a white-knuckled intensity that made my stomach turn over. The guy in the hoodie was the lure. He was standing there, acting like a creep, waiting for me to get angry or curious enough to crack the door and yell at him. And the moment that deadbolt slid back, the man on the ground was going to swing that iron bar into my shins and drag me out onto the concrete. I didn't make a sound. I didn't use the speaker. I just dropped the phone and crawled out of bed, keeping my body low to the floor. I reached for my glasses, my hands fumbling against the nightstand, and I headed for the kitchen to grab the biggest knife I owned. My breath was coming in these shallow, jagged hitches. The air in the house felt thick, like I was trying to inhale damp wool. It was suffocating. I called the police, whispering my address into the receiver while staring at the back door, wondering if there was a third one out there. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, but I couldn't stop looking at the phone screen. The guy in the hoodie started to move. He didn't leave. He stepped closer to the door and leaned his forehead against the wood. I could hear the faint, sickening sound of his skin sticking to the paint. He started to whisper. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a rhythmic, wet mumble, like he was reciting a grocery list or a prayer. I stood in the dark of my hallway, clutching a chef's knife, listening to a stranger whisper to my front door while his friend waited beneath him to break my bones. Then, the whispering stopped. The man in the hoodie looked up, right at the camera, and he didn't just smile this time, he laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a dry, wheezing sound, the noise a lung makes when it's collapsing. He signaled to the man on the ground, a quick, sharp motion of his hand. I heard the crowbar bite into the door frame. The sound of splintering wood was deafening in the silence of the house. CRRAC. It was visceral. I could envision the wood grain screaming as the rusted iron forced its way between the door and the jamb. I ran to the door and threw my weight against it, feeling the vibration of the crowbar through the wood. The force on the other side was immense. It felt like a physical weight pressing against my soul. "Go away!" I screamed, my voice breaking. "The cops are here. I have a gun." I didn't have a gun. I had a kitchen knife and a terrifying realization that the door wasn't going to hold. The wood groaned again, a long, agonizing screech of metal on timber. I could smell something then. It wasn't just the smell of the old wood breaking. It was a stench that drifted through the gap they were prying open. It didn't smell like copper or anything metallic. It smelled like a butcher shop's trash bin in the middle of July, sweet, rotting, and thick. It was the smell of something that had been dead for a week and then sat in the sun. Suddenly, the pressure stopped. Blue and red lights flickered against the trees at the end of the driveway. The man in the hoodie didn't run immediately. He turned slowly, looked at the approaching cruiser, and then looked back at my door. He blew a kiss. By the time the officers scrambled out of their car, the porch was empty. I opened the door, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell into the officer's arms. I pointed toward the woods behind the house, toward the dense wall of pines and overgrown brush. They caught the guy in the hoodie about 2 blocks away. He was just walking down the sidewalk like he was out for a stroll. When they tackled him, they found a roll of heavy-duty duct tape and a set of surgical scalpels in his pockets. No ID. No phone. Just the tools of a very specific, very horrible trade. But the other one? The croucher? They never found him. The police canine tracked his scent to the edge of the woods and then just stopped. The dog wouldn't go in. It just whined and tucked its tail, backed away from the tree line like it was facing something it couldn't understand. When the sun finally came up, I went outside with the officers to look at the porch. The brick was scratched where the crowbar had been braced. But it was the ground that made the lead investigator go quiet. In the dirt where the second man had been crouched, there weren't just footprints. There was a patch of dark, oily fluid soaked into the soil, and a scrap of something that looked like raw, gray leather. The officer picked it up with a gloved hand and then immediately dropped it, his face turning a shade of sickly green. "That's not leather," he muttered, looking at the woods. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't want to know. I spent the next day boarding up the back windows and installing 3 more cameras, but it doesn't help. Every time I look at the monitor, I expect to see that crown of matted hair peering over the edge of the frame. I keep thinking about the smell, that sweet, rotting stench that shouldn't have been coming from a living person. The worst part is what I found this morning. I was checking the perimeter of the house, making sure the crawl space was locked. On the brick wall, directly beneath the new camera I'd installed, there were fresh scratches. Not from a crowbar. They were thin, vertical gouges in the masonry, like someone had tried to climb the wall using nothing but their fingernails. And there, right on the windowsill of my bedroom, was a single, wet smudge of that same dark, oily fluid. He didn't leave when the cops came. He just waited for them to go, and then he came back to see where I sleep. I'm leaving today. I'm not even packing everything. I'm just getting in the car and driving until I run out of gas. Because I realized something when I looked at those scratches on the brick. They weren't at the bottom of the wall anymore. They were at the top. He isn't crouching anymore. He's learning how to reach.
Next story.
We didn't even want the damn thing at first. My husband, Mark, was the one who insisted on the high-end nursery camera with the 4K resolution and the 2-way audio. He said it would give us peace of mind while we were sleep training our daughter, Lily. It felt like a standard parenting move, just another piece of plastic tech to help us feel like we had some control over the chaos of having a 10-month-old. For a few months, it was just a convenience. I check my phone while folding laundry in the living room and see her little chest rising and falling, a grainy gray and white ghost on the screen. It was comforting until it wasn't. The first sign that something was off was subtle. I'd be sitting on the couch and the notification would pop up on my phone, movement detected in nursery. I'd open the app, expecting to see Lily kicking her legs or rolling over, but she would be dead still, fast asleep in the center of the crib. I figured it was just the shadows from the trees outside the window or maybe a glitch in the software sensitivity. Then, the talk light started turning on. It's a tiny blue LED on the front of the camera. It's only supposed to glow when one of us is pressing the microphone button on our phones to soothe her. One night, while Mark and I were watching a movie, I looked over at the monitor on the coffee table. The blue light was solid. I checked my phone. I wasn't touching the app. I looked at Mark's phone on the charger. He wasn't touching it either. We laughed it off as a firmware bug, and I went into the room to reset the device. When I walked in, the room was freezing, one of those deep, unnatural chills that makes the hair on your arms stand up, and the camera lens was tilted down, pointed directly at the floor right next to the crib, instead of at Lily. I adjusted it, clicked it back into place, and went to bed. A few nights later, the air in the house felt dense, like walking through waist-deep water. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and the house was dead silent. I woke up because I heard a sound coming from the bedside monitor. It wasn't Lily crying. It was a low, greeny static, the kind of white noise that feels like it's scraping the inside of your skull. I reached over and tapped the screen to wake it up. The night vision was active, bathing the nursery in that eerie, clinical glow. Lily was awake. She was sitting up in her crib, staring into the far corner of the room, the corner where the camera was mounted. She wasn't scared. She was swaying back and forth, slowly, as if she were listening to a song I couldn't hear. Then, the static on the monitor cleared, and a voice came through the speaker. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't white noise. It was a man's voice, incredibly close to the microphone, his breathing wet and labored. It sounded like he was smiling while he spoke. "Go back to sleep, little bird," he whispered. The voice was raspy, like his throat was filled with wet gravel. "Daddy's not coming yet. Not for a long time." My blood turned to ice. I felt a wave of nausea so powerful I thought I was going to be sick right there on the sheets. I shoved Mark, waking him up with a panic yell, and showed him the screen. We both watched, frozen, as the talk light on the monitor flickered. The person on the other end wasn't just watching, they were interacting. They were right there with her, digitally. "You have such pretty eyes, Lily," the voice continued. It was calm, chillingly calm. "Just like your mother's. I bet they look even better when you're crying." Mark didn't even grab his shoes. He bolted out of the bed and down the hallway. I stayed on the monitor, my eyes glued to the screen, terrified of what I might see manifest in the room. As Mark reached the door, the voice changed. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It became a sharp, distorted sound, a digitized laugh that sounded like metal grinding against metal. It was a joyful, predatory sound that vibrated through the tiny speaker of my phone. "He's here," the voice said, and then the screen went black. By the time I got to the nursery, Mark was holding Lily, who was screaming at the top of her lungs. He had ripped the camera off the wall, the plastic housing cracked where he'd gripped it too hard. The mounting bracket was dangling by a single screw. The room smelled wrong. It didn't smell like a baby's room anymore. It smelled like old, unwashed skin and something sickly sweet, like rotting fruit hidden under a floorboard. We didn't sleep. We stayed in the living room with every light in the house turned on, Lily clutched between us. The next morning, Mark, who works in IT, took the camera to his office to see if he could trace the connection. What he found made us pack a bag and go to a hotel for a week. The camera hadn't just been hacked that night. It had been accessed over 400 times in the last month. Someone had been logging in from a masked IP address every single night, usually around midnight, and staying connected for hours. They weren't just watching her sleep. They had been using the camera's internal storage to save clips. When Mark managed to recover the deleted files from the local SD card, we saw things that haunt me every time I close my eyes. There were videos of the camera panning around the room while we were in there, hovering over my shoulder while I was breastfeeding, following Mark as he changed her diaper. The person on the other end had been a silent, invisible guest in our home for weeks, watching our most private, vulnerable moments. But the worst part, the thing that makes me want to scream when I'm alone, was the final clip recorded just minutes before we woke up that night. The camera wasn't pointed at the crib. It was pointed at our bedroom door, which was visible through the nursery's open doorway across the hall. The person had zoomed in on the gap in our door. In the recording, you can see a shadow move in the hallway. It wasn't a digital ghost. It was a physical person. We found out later through a police investigation that our Wi-Fi password had been part of a massive data leak from our service provider, but that wasn't how they got in the house. They used the camera to learn our schedules, to see where we kept the spare key, to know exactly which floorboards creaked. When the police searched the perimeter of the house, they found a pile of cigarette butts directly under the nursery window. The grass was matted down where someone had been sitting for hours, night after night. There were deep scratches around the window frame, as if someone had been trying to find a way to pop the lock without breaking the glass. The "Daddy's not coming yet" comment wasn't just a creepy taunt. It was a statement of intent. They had been waiting for Mark to leave for his overnight shift, which he was supposed to start the following evening. They weren't just a voyeur, they were a predator waiting for the cage to open. I still smell that rotting, sweet scent sometimes when I'm in the kitchen or the basement. I've become obsessed with locks. I check the windows 4-5 times a night. We threw the camera in the trash, but the feeling of being watched hasn't left. I'll be sitting in the living room, and I'll glance at the corner of the ceiling where a smoke detector or a motion sensor is mounted, and my heart will skip a beat. The realization that someone saw us as nothing more than characters in a show they were directing is a weight that never goes away. It's a pressure on my chest that makes it hard to draw a full breath. They saw our love, our routine, our daughter's first steps, and all they saw was an opportunity for something horrific. We moved across the state a month later. We don't have any smart tech in the new house. No Alexa, no Ring doorbells, no baby monitors. We use a simple, old-school radio monitor now, the kind that only transmits audio and has a range of about 50 feet. But sometimes, when the house is very quiet and the wind is blowing against the siding, I swear I can hear a faint, metallic hum through the static of the receiver. It sounds like a breath. It sounds like someone waiting for me to say something so they can laugh that sharp, broken laugh again. And the worst part is knowing that out there, in some dark room behind a glowing screen, there's a folder full of videos of my daughter. He still has her. He still has us. We're just not on his screen anymore, and I pray to God he never finds the new link.
Next story.
I never used to be the kind of person who checked their phone the second a notification popped up. I'm a deep sleeper, the kind of guy who can sleep through a thunderstorm or a car alarm, but that changed a few months back. I live in a decent enough neighborhood, the kind where people still leave their bikes on the lawn, but I'd been seeing posts on Nextdoor about some guy stealing Amazon packages, so I finally caved and bought one of those Ring cameras for the back porch. I figured it would just capture the occasional stray cat or maybe a delivery driver taking a shortcut. The first few nights were quiet. Just the usual grainy footage of a moth fluttering near the lens or the neighbor's golden retriever sniffing around the bushes. But then, things started getting weird. Every night, like clockwork, my phone would buzz on the nightstand at exactly 3:15 a.m. Motion detected at back porch, the screen would say. Every time I'd pull up the live feed, heart racing a little, I'd see nothing. The porch was always empty. The wicker chairs were still, the The wind chimes weren't even swaying, and the darkness of the backyard looked as flat and dead as ever. I told myself it was a glitch. I've heard those sensors can be sensitive to heat signatures or even just a change in the light if a car drives by on the street over. But it kept happening. 3:15 a.m. 3:15 a.m. 3:15 a.m. It got to the point where I'd just roll over and ignore it, blaming the software. That was my first mistake. You think you're being logical by dismissing the things that scare you, but sometimes your gut is trying to tell you something that your brain isn't ready to handle. Last week, I finally got tired of the ghost notifications and decided to actually sit down and go through the past events log. I wanted to see if I could catch a glimpse of a raccoon or something I could report to the manufacturer as a false trigger. I pulled up the clip from the night before and set the playback to half speed. The footage starts with the porch bathed in that eerie, infrared glow. It's silent. Then, at exactly 3:15, the little human detected icon pops up at the bottom of the screen. My stomach did a weird little flip. There was nobody there. But then, I watched the wooden porch swing. It's an old, substantial thing made of thick oak. It doesn't move for the wind. But in the video, the swing slowly, very slowly, began to depress on the left side. It wasn't a gust of air. It looked exactly like someone had walked up and sat down. The chains groaned, a sound I could almost feel in my teeth, and the wood settled under a weight that wasn't visible to the camera. I felt a cold, oppressive tightness in my chest. I kept watching. After about a minute of the swing gently swaying, as if someone were sitting there reflecting on their day, a pair of footprints appeared on the floorboards. I don't mean they walked into the frame. I mean they manifested. Wet, thick mud began to press into the wood, one step at a time, leading away from the swing. Left foot. Right foot. Left foot. There was no person, no legs, no shadow. Just the soundless appearance of sludge-covered prints tracking toward my back door. The footprints stopped right at the welcome mat. I watched, paralyzed, as the brass handle of my back door slowly began to turn. It jiggled with a violent, rhythmic intensity for 30 seconds. Whoever, or whatever it was, they weren't just checking if it was unlocked. They were trying to force it. They were desperate to get in. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the handle stopped moving. The person seemed to turn around, the muddy prints trailing back toward the steps, and the motion alert ended. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with a steak knife, staring at that back door until the sun came up. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, some kind of high-tech projection, but when the light finally hit the porch, I saw them. The mud was real. It wasn't just dirt, it was this dark, oily filth that had dried into the grain of the wood. It had a smell that hit me the moment I cracked the door. It wasn't like a sewer or rotting garbage. It was a thick, metallic tang that coated the back of my throat, like the taste of a penny if it had been sitting in a stagnant pond for years. It was the scent of something raw and visceral, something that belonged inside a body, not on a porch. I spent the day cleaning it, scrubbing until my knuckles were raw, but the stain wouldn't fully lift. I felt like I was being watched the whole time. You know that prickle on the back of your neck? It felt like someone was standing just an inch behind me, breathing cold air into my hair, but every time I spun around, there was nothing but the empty yard and the overgrown woods behind my fence. That evening, I did something stupid. I stayed. I should have gone to a hotel, but I felt this weird, stubborn need to see it for myself. I didn't want to look through a screen anymore. I turned off all the lights in the house, sat on the floor of the kitchen facing the back door, and waited. I didn't have a weapon, just a heavy flashlight and my phone. The silence in the house was dense. It felt like the air had turned to syrup, making every breath a chore. Then, the chime on my phone went off. 3:15 a.m. I didn't hear footsteps on the wood. I heard something else. It was a wet, sliding sound, like someone dragging a piece of raw meat across a countertop. Slap. Slide. Slap. Slide. It was coming up the porch steps. I stared at the door handle. In the dim moonlight filtering through the glass pane, I saw the brass knob begin to rotate. It didn't jiggle this time. It turned slowly, deliberately, until it hit the lock. Then came the scratching. It wasn't a quick, frantic clawing like a dog makes. It was long, slow strokes, like someone was using a single, sharp nail to peel the paint off the door. I was frozen. I couldn't even scream. I just watched that door, praying the deadbolt would hold. Through the glass, I saw a smudge appear. It was a handprint, but the proportions were all wrong. The fingers were too long, with too many joints, pressing hard against the pane. There was no skin color, just a translucent, oily film that distorted the light. I finally found my voice and yelled, "I have a gun. I'm calling the police." The scratching stopped instantly. For a second, I thought it worked. But then I heard a voice. It didn't come from outside. It sounded like it was coming from the floorboards right beneath my feet. It was a wet, gurgling whisper, the sound of someone trying to speak through a throat full of fluid. "I'm already inside, Greg. My name." It knew my name. I bolted. I didn't grab my keys. I didn't grab my shoes. I ran out the front door and sprinted to my car, peeling out of the driveway while my phone continued to explode with motion-detected alerts. I drove to a 24-hour diner and sat there until the sun was high in the sky, shaking so hard I couldn't hold a coffee cup. When I finally went back with a couple of buddies from work, the house was silent. The back door was shut and locked, just like I'd left it. But when we went into the kitchen, the smell was overwhelming. That raw, iron-like stench was everywhere. And there, in the middle of the linoleum floor, was a single, wet footprint made of that same dark, oily mud. It was pointing toward the basement door. I haven't gone down there. I packed a bag and I've been staying at my sister's place for the last 3 days. I checked my ring app this morning, thinking maybe I'd see the police I called finally doing a sweep. But the camera was offline. The last recorded clip was from 4 a.m., right after I fled. In the video, the back door is wide open. There's nobody in the frame, but you can see the mud being tracked in, step by step, disappearing into the darkness of my kitchen. And right before the camera cuts to static, a face, or what looks like a face stripped of its features, just a smooth, pale mass of wet tissue, leans into the lens. It didn't have eyes, but I know it was looking right at me through the screen. I'm sitting in a Starbucks right now, trying to figure out what to do. My sister thinks I'm having a breakdown, but she didn't see the footprints. She didn't smell that iron scent. I just got a notification on my phone a minute ago. It wasn't from the Ring app. It was a text from my own home phone number. It just said, "The basement is too cold. I'm coming to your sister's." I don't know how it found me. I don't know what it is. All I know is that the air in this coffee shop suddenly feels very, very thick, and the guy sitting at the table behind me just sat down with a wet, heavy thud. I'm too afraid to turn around.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.